All right, everyone. Welcome to week 3 and episode 3 of the Evo Podcast, if we're going to call it anything. This week, we want to talk about what are some baselines needed to play college baseball. And so that is a very broad question or topic, and can go in a bunch of different ways. So we'll try to get as many different looks at it as we can and look at it and kind of each give our own perspective on it and see what each other has to say based on it. So today we have a guest appearance, Parker Lendrum, who's a sophomore now at Southern New Hampshire, Exeter High School graduate, and started training with us from day one here in the facility in Exeter. So knows a lot about Logan and myself and some of the other guys on the call, and will definitely be nice to hear his perspective on some stuff and his own journey and things like that. So we can kick things off, and I'll go first just saying, like, you definitely need to have like the obvious, which I think is, the basics and the abilities to play the game. The least amount of hindrance you put on the game, the better chance you are to be a consistent player. If you make routine plays and you have consistent at bats, or you consistently can locate your pitches and challenge hitters, you're going to be able to play. It's then just kind of figuring out what level you're capable of playing at, or what level wants you to be on their team to help them win games. And I think that's when we look at the college baseball landscape, like for most of these guys, it's going to be the last 4, maybe 5 years they play baseball. And you want to enjoy that experience. You want to feel like you're striving towards something for yourself, for something with your team. And I think getting to the most competitive program or school you can that's within your means, where you can get on the field and have a chance to make an impact, would be the target goal for any athlete. I think there's definitely athletes that are gonna go below where they could play and have the ability to play, right away and make an impact right away, which is awesome. And I think some athletes definitely need that. And then you also have athletes that are going to be later bloomers and go to a school that might be a little bit higher than where they're at. But by the time they're a sophomore or junior, they could be an impact player there. And I think just kind of looking at the spectrum that way of what it means to become a college baseball player and what the barrier to entry is. And then I think from my perspective, I think really just understanding what it is that you're committing to or stepping into, because I think for me that was the biggest thing of I got recruited and I decided where I was going to go, but I had no idea what college baseball was, and I had no idea what it meant to play baseball every day for that long and to play that many games. And so I think just having a general understanding of how college baseball compares to high school baseball or travel baseball or legion baseball, whatever your experience level is, just kind of understand what the differences might be. And I think that's like a couple of you guys do coach college teams or have coached college teams. Parker, you play for a college team. Like, what's your guys' thoughts, perspective on that?
Well, I can kind of start off with it, and we've talked about this previously. Car is just kind of going into a new environment. Had some conversations with some guys even recently, kind of going into a new environment of college and having this new freedom to be away from your family and kind of technically be able to do whatever you want, while also having to adhere to a relatively strict schedule, hopping right into fall ball. You're in a new place, you're finding a new routine while also having to go to classes, to deal with a social life, to go to all your practices and everything like that. And to manage all that, I think, is a very challenging thing. I think that was probably my biggest problem when I first went off to school, was just being a responsible young adult in that. And like a short story to myself is like, I basically I may have essentially gotten kicked off my team and begged my way back on the team as a freshman, because I was kind of irresponsible in the fact that, like, nothing serious, but it was just like not showing up on time, right? And just like not going to all my classes like I should, not doing as well in my academics as I should, because I really had no one holding myself accountable other than myself, and just like the intimidation factor of like my coach being mad at me for not showing up to those things. So essentially he, took me down the right field line and told me that it wasn't working out and that he was going to kick me off the team essentially, right? Which I don't know if he was serious or not, but it certainly scared me enough to beg my way back on the team and really take things more seriously. So it's not always necessarily just like the talent component, but it's your coach understanding that you are a responsible person and that he can count on you to be on the field and be eligible to be on the field, right? Because, and we talk about all the time, how you do anything is how you do everything, right? So if you can't be responsible in the things you don't want to do, which may be going to school, right? How can you really be accounted on when there's days that you don't want to necessarily work hard to become a better athlete and like become a better baseball player, like whether it's you don't like strength training, but you need to be able to do that, right? You don't want to do specific PFP drills, but you got to do these things to get through them to understand the play calls that are going to be happening in crucial situations late in games. So really just kind of that short story that ended up being a longer story, but essentially being accountable and responsible to those new routines that you're going to have is very vital. And I think the best way to prepare for it is to have conversations with people who've already been there. So that's kind of my 2 cents on it.
I think that's a great point, Logan. I think to build off of that, I think something a lot of guys don't do is they don't do their due diligence when they're looking for the right school and the right fit, and they make a baseball decision. And I mean, I was a D3 guy / D2 guy, and I chose a school based off of a baseball decision, and it was a good athletic scholarship to D2, but I absolutely hated the school. I compromised my major, and it was like more of an ego decision to want to go to a school with that. And something I never really thought about within that decision is what would life be like if I didn't play baseball and then I got hurt. And that's exactly what I was kind of thrown with. And I think when you're in an environment that you don't really like and one you're not really comfortable in and one you don't really want to be in, you're not going to obviously get the best results. And that's why it's really important when you are going through the process, like what Logan just alluded to, that you want to talk to people about the process. You also want to talk to people about like the coaching staff. You want to talk to people about the actual school. You want to do as much homework as you can about the school and see if that's actually a good fit. Because if you're in a good fit and you feel really comfortable and it's something that you see yourself growing with, both as a player and as an individual, then you're going to want to push yourself a little bit more just because you're a little bit more likely to want to get up. And you might like your teammates more because now maybe you're with people that are more likely, more like-minded. And iron sharpens iron. So, I mean, I coach in college, so like we've had kids that they just didn't like the school that they committed to, and that's fine. That's part of the process. But some of the times the kids just didn't really do the due diligence, just kind of took the first offer. And I think within the college process, it's really important to make sure that you know what you like and you go through the process. And in that regard, it's, making sure that academically it's a fit, financially it's a fit. Those are all things that people don't really think about when they're thinking about college. And the coaching staff, are you on the same page as the coaching staff? Would it be an easy transition? So guys that train with East Coast Evo, we have our facilities, like, would that transition be smooth? And is that coach receptive to what we coach and teach and stuff like that? And can you continue developing? Or is it going to be, you go to school, the development maybe isn't the greatest there, and then you come back to us, we're going to patch together stuff and then just kind of get put together. So that's something that I think some guys don't think about in the college process, is just like the actual fit and the mold and how they're actually going to develop and what the next 4 years are going to look like. Or for COVID guys, the next 7 years, because some guys were there for 7 years. So mainly D3, but just things to think about for our guys that are looking at schools and they're getting close to that age.
I think I can give a little bit of perspective from someone who has coached college baseball. So I've coached at the NAI level and the Division III level. And, within the recruiting processes, when those schools are looking at players, obviously they're going to look at their grades, but then also they're going to look at their baseball ability. And baseball, for the longest time, they've looked at 5 tools. They've looked at speed, power, ability to hit, arm strength, and your speed running. and then power, I'm talking about hitting in that regard. But the way, we would look at it from our schools is we would try to, recruit players with like 1 to 2 really solid tools, and then look to be able to develop another tool on top of that. I think that's something that could be, good for parents or athletes listening to hear. And to go off of that, like those 5 tools I talked about, I think those are very important. They can help get your foot in the door. But like Carson and Logan talked about, there's other intangible things that are going to help to keep you there and help to build on top of those tools that you have, like work ethic, the ability to prioritize the right things, and there's more intangible things there too. But I think those are just as important as the baseball tools.
Yeah, I think he kind of brings up a good point with those 5 tools. Like coming into like the whole recruiting process before I entered college, I kind of had the idea that you had to have all of those, or at least the majority of them. And actually being in college has provided a whole new perspective about what coaches are looking for and what teams are actually comprised of. I'd say most kids, at least where I'm at, and other schools I've been exposed to, a lot of kids will have those 1 or 2 tools, and that's what the coach will use them for. Say like a big speed guy, you'll be recruited specifically just for that, and just to like run the bases or anything like that, like to be a pinch runner. I would have never expected someone would be recruited solely for that reason, but that's exactly what happens. Or on the mound, you might have a guy who's recruited solely based off his velocity, and then he's someone who can be trained into having more command, more stuff, or someone who's the exact opposite, who might not have that velocity, but can have that command, have that stuff, and they kind of disregard the velocity for the most part. I mean, they can't be throwing, totally under the baseline, but they're not really focusing on that velocity too much or anything like hitting. Like you don't have to have that power. You don't have to have the just base hits, the average, whatever. All of that combined is just what can you do that one category better than anyone else. I really didn't know that before being exposed to all my teammates and the whole college atmosphere. So I think that's just a totally new perspective that I have now.
Parker, to actually build off of that real quick, there was a school that they meant to the College World Series this year in D3, Misericordia, and the ESPN wrote a whole article on them, and they had I think they had close to like 450 walks and hit by pitches as a team. And how they recruited was, and ESPN wrote a whole article, so it's worth a good read. When they were recruiting, they were specifically looking for guys that worked gap to gap and guys that stood in the box to get hit and guys that worked counts. Like that was specifically the kind of hitters that were going. They didn't really care too much about power. Just want guys to work counts to get hit by pitches and not flinch. And then the guys that were getting out of the way of those pitches were actually getting benched. And then, so like, I think as a team, they had 250 hit by pitches and then 200 walks. And in 40 games, that's a lot.
Yeah,
like,
it's crazy.
It's a hell of a strategy. Just you guys get up there, don't swing.
Yeah,
stay
and
there.
I think
it worked literally.
Yeah.
And I think like to go off of like that and go off what Parker's saying and Andrew, like having the ability to self-assess your tools, right? And understand what you are good at, what's going to help you at the next level, and like where can that tool or those tools be best utilized, because that's where we can come into play, right? Is oftentimes you're talking with athletes about, okay, this is what you're good at, this is what you're not so good at, and these are the baselines needed to go to this level of a school. Like if you want to go to a Power 5 school, you're going to probably need to have a good amount of those tools. You're going to have a pretty good baseball IQ. And those are all things you need to be able to self-assess as well, because if you're going to go out and go to a bunch of camps that are at schools above the level that should be recruiting you, you're probably not doing yourself the best service. Versus if you know, okay, my fastball is, like, I thought you brought up a good point. if your fastball is not, lighting up the radar gun, don't expect it to just draw attention, right? But if you have very good pitch mix and your stuff moves and you can attack the zone, I think about a bunch of guys, right? Just right off of that. Well, now okay, if I go showcase my ability to do these things in front of schools that know my velocity is going to go up, and they know that what I do right now is useful enough to potentially play as a freshman. But if I'm 20 pounds heavier than I am right now at 16 or 17, it's going to be definitely a better fastball. Now that kid's going to be potentially on the field as a freshman in the spring, if not by their sophomore year. And so just also being able to equate those things. We talked about it a bit yesterday, like no 80-mile-an-hour fastball or 82-mile-an-hour fastball is really alike. They all have individual movement characteristics. They all have individual release characteristics, right? So there is a quote unquote average, but guys that fall outside of those averages could lead to being very desirable things. They could be very useful things, right? Like Parker, you talked about relief pitcher, right? A guy might come in the game and literally only throw sidearm sliders, and he will do that for 1 to 2 innings and try to get their best 4 or 5 hitters out. And like that guy's skill, and the coach saw the ability for that kid to become or be used as that piece. And so if you know that, and that like you're going to eventually be a reliever specialist at a school, well, like those are good questions to start to ask when schools start to recruit you, is like, how do you use relievers? How many relievers pitch over the course of a weekend series? Like, start to figure out what your competition might be at that school. If they're like, we have 55 players in the fall and we carry 35 players in the spring, now your competition to be one of 5 relievers is against 30, right? 25, 30 other guys. That's a really big battle for you. Versus if they're bringing in 10 freshmen each year, 5 of them are pitchers, and they carry a 35-man roster. Now okay, I got a pretty legit chance to compete for innings within my first year or two. And I think a lot of that is just the self-assessment process. And unfortunately, a lot of times, like I was talking to a kid yesterday who's a freshman in high school, and we were talking about a Division III program that's very competitive, where a lot of kids from here have gone on to play over the last couple of years. And he knows the kids, and he knows how talented they are. He's seen them throw live at bats and do these things. And he's like, oh, that kid's going to a D3 school. And I'm like, yeah, but they're going to a D3 school that doesn't really lose and is a very, very competitive program. And everyone on that program is just like that kid that you know. And he's like, oh, so D3 is not bad. And I'm like, no. Like, understanding that you don't have to have the bias or the label, and just like look at the program and the college for what it is worth on paper versus the cost, then factor in your intuition and some subjectivity. But like, you should be able to make those like associations and decisions. And I think it's also like you should have people in your corner that can help you, right? And that's where I think we can be a huge resource and are a huge resource for the athletes here.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think real quickly, one of the things that I have noticed both when I was playing and also now being a coach, is really the fact that like a lot of guys come out of high school, and this kind of goes back to what you were saying about velocity. And there could be guys that come out of high school and they have a great fastball. Like it's something where, they maybe as a D3 guy, if you're coming in as a freshman and you're like mid 80s, that's pretty good. But the thing is maybe they come from a situation where they got away with using that fastball so much, and they haven't really matured as a pitcher, where they're throwing, a breaking ball, like a slider, maybe a changeup. That's not something that they've gotten very accustomed to throwing, because they've just lived and died by their fastball because it was above average at the high school level. And then they get into college and then they get their bell rung, and it's kind of like a big wake up call. And I think for me, that was something that I experienced as a player, but I've also seen that from a coaching standpoint. So it's almost one of those things where at the high school level, failure is an okay thing. And if you can learn to deal with that a little bit when you're in high school, that's going to help you more as a pitcher at the college level, because if the first time you're having to figure out how to land an 0-0 slider is in college, then that's going to be a tough situation. Like if you had to go through that battle as a high schooler, that's going to put you in a much better spot. And I think just going off of that, that's really what kind of presents itself to me, is like being able to have like a college breaking ball as a high schooler. That's a big deal, because I've seen a lot of guys at the college level where they just don't have that breaking ball, and they're an upper 80s fastball and they still get lit up.
100%. And I think from a recruitability standpoint, like coaches, I mean, you guys are coaches, right? Like if you see a kid throwing 85 with a nasty slider that he locates and executes or swing and miss, and you see a guy who throws 90, 91, but doesn't sniff the zone, like I'll take the guy that throws 85 with the ability to carve with a slider every single time, because my job is to win. My job is to my job is to use this athlete to try to win as many games as I can. And that's where I recognize that this athlete's tool is this, and now I'm going to use it as much as I can. And I think that's also like, it took me a little while to understand the concept of sports in college being a business, right? And that like this isn't like high school sports where you try out for the team with your buddies and the coach is a teacher or someone in the community who's essentially donating a lot of their time to be out there. And then it's only a 20 game season. Like, no, this is 3 people at least are making their living coaching that team, recruiting the players on that team, deciding who plays, and ultimately one person, the head coach, is in charge of making all of those decisions, and all of the responsibility and accountability falls onto them for making those decisions. So they're only going to play and use you as a player if they think that you're going to help win more games than your current roster. Like everyone plays fantasy football and understands that. We'll just literally look at your team in that manner, and that's how it's operated. Like unless you're better than, if you're a better replacement than the current player, you have an opportunity to make an impact. But if you're not, then you're not going to be given the opportunity to make that impact either. And that's where I think understanding those things, and that's where like the touchy subjects of like how hard do I need to throw the ball, how hard do I need to hit the ball, come into play. Because like 90 on perfect game is different than 90 consistently with desirable metrics, right? If you hit 90 one time while you sit 86, that's like great that your perfect game page shows that. But like if you're not going to replicate that next spring and the spring after that consistently, then the coach can't count on that. And so also like I think having a most likely, which is tough, and this is where I guess I have a question for you guys, is like, and Parker especially, like when you're looking at the recruiting process, my perspective would be to start looking at the schools below where you think you're going to end up. Get a very good understanding of what those schools are, what conferences they play in, have they produced high level players to pro ball, things like that. What leagues do kids play summer ball in? And then hopefully you get recruited by those schools because they're below where you think you should play. And then hopefully you get recruited by some schools that you've never heard of, and now you start to do your homework on those schools just like that. Rather than, I feel like everyone takes the opposite approach, which is they start looking at Vanderbilt and Ole Miss and Clemson and these schools, and then next thing you know, they're working backwards and it feels like it's a failure. And in reality, it's just, I think, starting the process like locally, right? If you live within an hour of a college baseball program, go watch one of their games in the spring. They play Saturdays and Sundays, can easily look up their schedule, go watch, like see how you compare to that. Because like if in your mind you're thinking that it's a D1 or bust situation, and then you go watch a local D3 game and you're like, holy shit, these kids are a lot better than me right now. Well, then like what in your right mind makes you think that you're going to end up on the roster at Vanderbilt? And that's like, it's just the reality of it. But I had never seen a college baseball practice or game until I was committed And I think I went to one game my spring of my senior year of high school. And I was like, oh wow, this is going to be a lot harder than I thought. Right? Like every kid was rolling out of the pen, throwing low 90s with the slider. Every kid on the field was hitting the ball hard. And I was like, this is a completely different game than what I'm used to playing. So I think that's long-winded a bit, but just like to throw it back at you guys, right? Like how do you look at that, I guess, Parker, as going into the recruiting process, like what to expect, maybe how would you handle it if you had the chance to do it again?
Yeah, definitely. I don't know. For me, the recruiting process ended up being very long and convoluted. I think prior a lot of the point that I didn't end up doing the approach that you kind of talked about. I did the other way, first looking at whatever I grew up watching Vanderbilt, all those big schools. So obviously that's the dream. That's what I'm looking for. Um, but then after looking through those, it eventually led me to some of the more local schools, obviously like where I'm at right now, and other schools in the area, and starting to think more about like the academic side of things. I started looking at more technical institutes, that kind of thing that would fit my major and fit just more of my future dreams outside of baseball too. So I ended up having a wide range of schools from, your Clemsons of the world to like your MITs of the world. And just weighing so many different options or so many different factors in those decisions. I think it is important to step back and kind of remove yourself from almost like the politics side of it, where, if you're committing somewhere, like, are people gonna think, oh, like that's cool, or, it's whatever. Like a lot of people don't know, especially your common person doesn't know about the whole the whole background of college sports. They see D3, they might just write you off as just another kid who's going to play uh, college baseball. But in reality, even those D3 programs are very good baseball from everything that I've seen. And I had a similar experience to you coming into school, or even for me before coming to school, just seeing how crazy college baseball actually can be. I remember watching a game at Fisher Cat Stadium, and there was a kid who hit a ball completely out of the stadium, like 400 something feet. I'm like, okay, these kids can play. Like, so just like going to that and I think just being able to take a step back and evaluate everything rather than just, what looks good is what I would recommend. Because if you're too focused on what other people think or things outside of your immediate goals, then you're going to end up making the process more complicated, and you might end up at a school that's not exactly a fit for you.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said. I think I had a couple points here that obviously we can talk about more in another time too, but I think a lot of it comes back to just kind of knowing yourself, understanding what your skills are. We talked about the five main skills, but like understanding who you are as a player and how you can either get one of those skills or just improve the current skills that you have, I think is so incredibly important too. So doing what you just talked about and like looking at local talent around and being like, all right, well, this is a level I want to play at. This is a level that I want to play above. Like, okay, well, you need to do better than those guys. You need to have better qualities than those guys. And then it comes back to understanding how you improve upon those things. And it could just be more skill work at that. It could be just harnessing your craft a little bit, but it also could be like, what is the thing that is holding me back from throwing harder or hitting the ball harder or running faster? Sometimes it's not just skill work. Sometimes it's more the strength and conditioning side of it. And you need to get away from the field, right? Maybe you're literally just like force deficient. You need to gain weight. You need to get stronger through there. And that's kind of where a lot of what we do comes into play, right? And the reason why we say all the time, why I think having both of these things of strength and conditioning in your workouts along with the skill work is so incredibly important, because then we can collaborate and communicate on those things, right? If you're doing these things in separate places, if Andrew's trying to increase a kid's exit velocity and he looks like he's swinging well, he's doing all these things, and he's at the proper weight and stuff like that. It's like, well, why can't this kid just move faster? It's like, well, he may not have those answers yet, and that's why he can come talk with me and stuff like that. Or I could have a kid that's very strong and moves really well, but I'm like, well, why isn't this kid's exit velocity up? Why isn't he throwing harder? It's like, well, I don't know that. I need to talk to someone like Andrew who can break down the mechanics of those things. So being able to have that communication is going to be so important. And then also what I don't think people realize is how, I don't want to say this in an okay way, but like how little help I think you're really going to get in a college setting as far as development. And it's just not there, and it's not the coach's fault. They have a lot of kids to work with. I was a college coach for 3 years as well, and like I got out of it because I really didn't have that much time to work with the kids that I wanted to work with, right? And it felt like I couldn't make as big of an impact as I could doing this right now, where I have unlimited time, right? The NCAA is pretty strict with how often we can do practices, especially at a D3 level too. D1, I mean, I guess they can do pretty much whatever they want. It's ridiculous, but it becomes a challenge to really, so you need to know yourself and understand what are the things that you need to continue to work on, because a lot of it will be put on yourself or just you working with your teammates. And I'm sure Parker's going through that similar thing right now, is that he if he didn't know what he needed to work on, he can't just rely on his coaches to tell him everything and kind of guide him through the process. But yeah, that was I guess 1.2 on what Andrew was saying as well, especially for the college level. And like he was just talking about, you know, obviously throwing harder, hitting harder, all these things, and Driveline talks about it a lot with the skills that scale thing. And like, you know, just because like hitting the ball on the ground because the fielders may stink in high school may have you with a 550 batting average because you hit the ball hard on the ground, but like that is not a skill that scales. Get the ball in the air, hit it hard, right? Same thing as Parker and Carson were talking about a little bit, is like throwing hard may get it done because you got a good fastball in high school, but like, again, not a skill that necessarily scales unless you're going to continue to raise that ceiling of where your velocity is. So a lot of guys don't gain velocity in college, right? To get better, you have to either locate better, manage the game better, or develop off-speed pitches, right? So like not being satisfied with just being good in high school, but also pushing yourself to be like, okay, well, like I'm good right now, but how do I make sure that I can dominate so I can go eventually dominate at the college level? What are the missing links to make me an unbelievable baseball player or an unbelievable athlete in general?
Logan, I think you bring up a very good point with the self-sufficiency. For most kids, college is the first time they're ever away from their parents and have the ability to make their own choices. They have the freedom to do pretty much whatever. If you want to go to class, go to class. If you want to skip on class, you can do that. Obviously, there's going to be repercussions, but like your parents aren't there holding your hand to tell you to go to class, to wake up, to go to lift, whatever it may be. And I think that's like the self-sufficiency is a huge thing in college, where like you're really not getting that much development among a college team. So that's why I think we play a huge role in helping athletes understand kind of the training they need. And then hopefully we give them some guidelines to bring that to their college program, so that, you know, if they're not getting help with coaches or whatever it may be, that they kind of have an understanding of what they need to improve themselves or just try to sniff time on the field. But I think self-sufficiency in college is one of the biggest things that I know I didn't realize going from high school to college.
Yeah, I think
My
two
apologies.
immediate things. Sorry, Gary. That just pop and I'll go quick. It's like self-sufficiency, especially in the weight room. If you have a team lift with 35 plus players, you are lucky to have more than one strength coach, maybe a couple interns with you. So like you're not going to be told how to do an exercise or how to do it properly. You're going to be expected to do it with the most weight you can in the time allotted, and the next guy's going. And I remember it took me at least 1 year to feel comfortable in the weight room at school. And that's crazy because it's probably a year of wasted time where like I really just didn't know what I was doing. I was shying away from things because I thought it was going to impact me negatively. And there were just some things I didn't know how to do, which I think is like huge. And then back to what I was saying about just like getting a pulse on the local college product before you dream big and get outside the local product is like, hey, if you want, you can Google, you know, average HitTrax numbers per age. You can Google average average college TrackMan stuff. You could figure out how hard guys throw and how hard guys hit the ball. Like it's out there, right? We can talk about it in detail one day. But like if you are throwing what the average thrower throws at a Vanderbilt or Clemson, like yes, entertain those schools and look into that. Not saying that we shouldn't do that, right? But if your baseline is 2 standard deviations below where you need to be to do that, then like don't look at that school, right? If you're a guy who throws 86, right, to 88, like you are below the percentile needed to be like a quote unquote power 5 right-handed thrower, right? So, well, let's not look at power 5 programs until you are closer to that number. And I think everyone has the ability to look those things up, which is huge. And we provide feedback and we provide PRs and incentivize the athletes to push those numbers up because it does. It gives you somewhat of a baseline and a pulse on kind of where you might be in the landscape. So that stuff's all out there, easily accessible and findable, and we'll dive into it later. But Gary, you can jump in. Sorry there.
Very good. No, that was a good point. Something that we preach to our guys is being invested in their own development. So like alluding to like what you guys have been talking about with like the lack of potential coaching you're gonna have. Like I think the realistic part of it is we have a couple of Power 5 guys, and like even at those schools, like they may not have a baseball specific strength coach. We have guys at mid majors, and they're saying they're not getting like the support that they need. And so I think for one, like if you're a college kid, like whatever you do at practice and whatever you do with your coaches, like that's just the bare minimum. And then like it doesn't mean you have to go and train 7 days a week. That's not what we mean. It just means like if you have a question, go be a student in the game. And like there's so much information out there now that there's no excuse to not learn something new. And that doesn't mean to get domed up. It's just like be inquisitive. Like just try and dive into certain topics, and to see if you can become really good at learning it. And we have a couple guys that do that. I think at the high school level, like that's something else too. Like I think the reality of things is that at least around here, to get a pulse on like the local Division 3 schools, because that's where I'm coaching at, there's a lot of turnover now with coaches, and it's a lot of young coaches. And the quickest way that you can build a program is in the portal. And so, for example, our school, we have 17 transfers. 8 out of my 9 starting hitters are transfers, and majority of my pitching staff is transfers. And so, like, if you're a high school kid and you're trying to go to a local Division 3 school, and like one thing you got to want to pay attention to is, for one, like, is it a new coach, and like what's the history of the program, and are they trying to build it quick? Because if it is, like, they're going to go transfers, and then you're going to be competing against a guy that's not 18 or 19 at your age. You're going to be competing with probably a graduate student that's a man and like looks like Andrew, a guy has a beard, and just completely different makeup than you. And then on the flip side of it, how many kids now are doing reclass? And that's just all stemming from the transfer portal because of COVID. So now that if you're a kid that's a little bit undersized, but you're skilled and you're trying to get recruited, well, there's a kid that's just like you, but he just reclassed. Now he's in your class. And like just the competition is so much. The competition, I think, is way more aggressive now. And you really do have to be invested in your own development. And I think it's important for guys to know like where they're spending their money and where they're spending their time. And we say this to our college guys, and we talk about being invested in their development. Are you going to spend $500 on country tickets, like in the summer for a concert? Or are you going to spend that money and go to a performance facility? And are you going to invest in your development? So that way you can have a way to compete with someone when you come back in the fall. That doesn't mean necessarily that you can't have a social life. It's just like, where are your priorities? And typically what we're seeing in our program is the guys that don't have the priorities at the top, like they're the ones that are kind of getting weeded out. And I think that's kind of the reality of it across the board in a lot of college programs at the moment. It's just, like people got to understand that college numbers ever since COVID are kind of going down a little bit. So like roster sizes have to go down because they can't afford to, be paying for big rosters. And that means more competition. That's just kind of the reality of it. So I think guys just got to kind of recognize that. And everything we talked about today is pieces to the puzzle with it. There's been a lot of great information that we've talked about in this Zoom.
Thanks, Gary. I agree. This should be like a prerequisite for kids who train within the walls. Like just starting to learn these things is so important. And I think everyone wants to hear from special guest Coach Cole. and see his perspective on the topic and see what he's
Yeah,
got
yeah.
to
So
explain to young guys.
I'm gonna take a different kind of route of conversation, and that would be talking about kind of remaining healthy and being able to play. Because obviously, if you're healthy and you're not having any pain, you're able to play. If you have pain, you can't play. You can't really get recruited. That's kind of how I kind of went through my high school prep year kind of experience. I was injured for years, couldn't get recruited because I couldn't let coaches see me play. So I think learning from a younger age and in high school all the way up to college, learning about your body, learning what makes you feel good, what doesn't make you feel good, and listening to your coaches and not trying to take kind of 3 steps beyond what they're saying and thinking you know kind of more than them or you know what's best for you in some instances, which can be true, but kind of overstepping and doing too much and digging yourself a recovery hole is never really going to work out. And sometimes you just gotta step back, listen to your coaches. They've been doing this for years, helping players kind of get where they want to be. So it's kind of listening to them and trusting the process and not kind of trying to do too much.
I think that's perfect, and we'll build off this next week. I think we got a good topic for next week already in terms of just talking about being able to handle like competition and be able to face failure, head on, and what that means as you become a young adult, young man, like what our experiences were kind of like with that. We all probably, handle and deal with failure in our own ways. But like Gary said earlier, iron sharpens iron. And I think we've all experienced and can agree that failing at something usually leads to quite a bit of future value in said subject, as long as you're willing to continue to discover what lies behind the failure and you're not just immediately turned off by it. So next week we'll dive into just kind of theory of competition and how kids could be better at it, how they can little things that they can do in everyday life to compete and ways they can compete, not just on the field, because we have a bunch of other windows in our life where we can compete and we can dive into all of that stuff. So without further ado, thank you, Mr. Parker Lendrum. It was great having you on, and we will look forward to next week and continuing to provide information like this each week. If you guys have any questions, comments, please leave them below, and then feel free to share this with your friends, share this with younger athletes, your kids, anyone who's watching this. We really think there's takeaways throughout this for any sport. It doesn't have to be baseball specific. I think a lot of us are athletes of the Northeast. We played multiple sports. We understand things from a multitude of lenses. So a lot more to be taken away than just baseball. And again, look forward to having you guys back, and we'll talk next week. Thanks, everyone.